Okay, so loudness is a topic that's much discussed, much worried about. There's a lot of controversial opinions about it. Should you make your mixes loud? Should you not make them loud? I'm not gonna go into any of that. I'm just gonna try to give you a basic idea of different kinds of volume measurement and the fundamentals of making something sound louder, what you will have to do to make your mixes louder, and also maybe when you want to avoid doing these things, because they of course come with certain drawbacks. So the first kind of measurement is very basic, I'm sure you've heard of it, the peak measurement. It's the most naive idea, it's just how far the speaker extends or retracts when it plays back your audio file. The maximum value for the peak measurement is usually given as a kind of number in your DAW, or here you can see these kinds of bars. These show when the audio peaked the highest. It's the limiting factor for clipping, and it sort of limits how loud you can really make your audio, but it's not very close to human perception. Then we've got RMS measurement. You can hopefully see this white line here. It's a kind of average of the peak measurement over time. It's about 200 milliseconds between 100 and 300 depending on the measurement. And it's what you can see in most DAWs as the solid bar here that jumps up and down. The peak moves way too fast, while the RMS moves at a tempo where you can sort of follow it. It's a bit closer to what you actually hear. As you can see, it doesn't extend quite as high as the peak measurement. It takes longer to rise and fall. But even this has a kind of problem, because human ears aren't really as sensitive to every frequency the same. So if you look at this graph, it shows equal loudness contours, which basically means things at one volume across these lines here will be heard as the same volume. If you go to like 3K, for example, where our ears are the most sensitive, it takes a much quieter sound to sound like the same loudness as, for example, as 20 Hertz or something. You may have observed this when you've been mixing and you had to make your bass peak much higher than your highs, because our ears are just a lot less sensitive there. So to get a bit of a better measurement, the K weighting has been introduced, and the LUFS mainly for TV broadcasts, but now it's also used for music. Basically what this measurement does is it applies a filter to them, which is meant to kind of approximate these equal loudness curves. You can see here it's not nearly as precise because these curves are also individually different, but the basic idea is you get a low cut at around 80 Hertz and then a high shelf of 4 dB at 2 kilohertz, and then you take the RMS measurement. There's three kinds of LUFS measurements. You've got the momentary LUFS, which are 400 milliseconds and sort of describe individual audio events like a single sound of a drum hitting or something. Short term, which are like at this moment in the song sounds about like this loudness. And integrated LUFS, which is over the entire song you take a measurement and then you average out the LUFS value and throw out anything that's over 10 LUFS quieter than the average and sort of average that again. This is not perfect either. It's designed for broadcast, as I said, but it's a lot closer to what you hear, and it's also what streaming services and so on use to measure your loudness. If you want to take a measurement, DP Meter 5 is a good plugin to do that. You can see here integrated loudness, short-term max, true peak max, momentary loudness. There are different modes here where you can also get RMS and stuff, and this is a very useful tool to get a sort of basic idea of your mix. Now on to loudness bias. There are essentially two sides to it. The basic idea is just things that are louder just sound more detailed and sound better to us. Whenever something is louder, it becomes very difficult to judge if it actually sounds better. So one side to this, of course, is avoiding it when mixing, when driving a saturation or a compressor or something like that. You will want to gain compensate so you can actually hear the frequency difference that this compressor is making, and you're not just listening to a louder sound. But there's also another side to it, which some people call the loudness wars, or just call competitive loudness, which basically is you want your song to sound as loud as other people's songs because it will sound better. So this will lead you to the conclusion that you might want to mix and master loud. The basic principles of this, I think, follow quite nicely from how LUFS works. It's just you want your dynamics controlled, so a low peak value but a high RMS value, and a bright mix because our ears are more sensitive to higher values. So if you follow these two principles, that's basically where all techniques of limiting, sidechaining, multi-band compression and so on people use for loudness follow from. This is sort of the guiding principle, the top-heavy sausage, if you will. Now, there are some caveats to this, because to make sure that music is always at the same volume roughly, to give a listener a better experience and make sure the ads can always be louder, streaming services like Spotify normalize. So this quote here is from their website. What they do is they take an integrated LUFS measurement of your song or album, depending on context, and normalize all songs and albums to one volume. So what you can see here in the bottom in this waveform is a recording I made of Spotify. And as you can see, the more dynamic masters here are peaking higher, because by default this volume normalization is turned on, while these louder ones, I think, are mostly bass music masters. They're turned down quite a bit. Well, this is, I think, a Dave Brubeck record or something like that. This will peak higher, so this is what Spotify actually played back. And of course, making your songs loud will have a lot of drawbacks because of distortion you introduce to the sound. So that's basically already it, the sort of overarching principles of loudness. If you want to experience this by yourself, I suggest going into Spotify, into your settings, having a look if normalization is on or off, and making a playlist with songs from wildly different genres, like maybe some jazz, some Skrillex songs, some pop music, some country, whatever, and just listening to the same playlist with and without loudness normalization to get a sort of feel for how it changes the whole experience, and keep in mind that by default it is turned on. So yeah, I hope that helped bring some clarity to the whole thing. See you.